Before this story continues, please allow me to make one thing clear. The story you are about to hear is a work of fiction created for entertainment and educational purposes, reflecting toxic family conflict and the inner journey of a woman who endured in silence for far too long. All characters' events and situations are entirely fictional and do not represent any real person or real event. This content may be supported by AI tools during the creative process. This story does not promote violence, hatred, or harm of any kind. It is told to inspire empathy, reflection, and personal growth, especially for women who have sacrificed, endured, and been hurt within their own families. All content is built to be advertiser-friendly and compliant with YouTube community guidelines, and it does not intend to target, defame, or imply any real individual. If you recognize a piece of your own life in this story, stay until the end. And if something in your heart is stirred, share your thoughts in the comments or follow the channel to continue walking alongside stories made for women who deserved understanding and respect long before they were given it. My name is Noelle. I am 28 years old, a single mom, and I live in a quiet middle-class suburb outside Columbus, Ohio. The kind of place where minivans line the school pickup lane, HOA notices sit on kitchen counters, and nobody thinks anything dramatic ever happens behind closed doors. My daughter Emma is 5. She loves paper crowns, purple balloons, and the idea that birthdays mean people show up just because you matter. My mother Diane is 60, organized, church-going, and deeply convinced that sacrifice only counts when she benefits from it. My father Richard is 62, quiet, agreeable, and fond of the phrase family duty, especially when it costs him nothing. My older sister Lauren is 34, the golden child, the one whose mistakes are always understandable and whose needs are always urgent. And me, I am the reliable one. In our family, being responsible was not a compliment. It was an unpaid job title. It was May 2023, the last week of kindergarten, the week Emma had been counting down to since March. I tied the final purple ribbon to the back fence, stepped onto the porch, and checked my phone again. No new messages. The Kroger cake was already on the table, inside the cheap kind with too much frosting and her name piped slightly crooked, but she loved it because I let her choose the colors herself. I could hear her inside humming the sounds she made when she was excited and trying to be patient at the same time. She came out holding a paper crown she had made at school, paused at the top of the steps and looked past me toward the street. "Mom," she asked, her voice careful, "where is Grandma?" I did not answer right away. I scanned the driveway out of habit as if a car might appear simply because I wanted it to. No one was coming. No one had texted. No one had called. Emma adjusted the crown on her head the way kids do when they are pretending not to feel disappointed, and then she said it again, softer this time. "Is Grandma bringing Aunt Lauren too?" I told her they were probably running late, even as my stomach tightened in that familiar way that meant I already knew the truth. I stepped inside to grab napkins and my phone buzzed in my hand. For a second I felt relief. Then I saw it was Instagram. My mother's story was at the top. Diane and Lauren were sitting at a polished table, tiny spoons in their hands, leaning toward each other under warm lighting. A caption floated across the image. Event planning day. Hearts. They were tasting desserts at a venue across town. At the exact hour my daughter was standing on our porch asking where her grandmother was. That was the moment something in me went quiet. Not loud, not explosive, just clear. They were not busy. They had made a choice. Emma tugged on my sleeve and asked if she should put her crown back inside so it would not get ruined before Grandma came. I knelt down and adjusted it for her, my hand steady, even though my chest felt hollow. She smiled at me, trusting, hopeful, and completely unaware that she was learning a lesson I had spent my entire life learning the hard way. That showing up was optional when it came to us. I did not cry. I did not call my mother. I did not post anything online. I took photos of Emma blowing out her candles, of her opening presents from classmates and neighbors, of her laughing so hard she forgot to look at the driveway anymore. I smiled in every picture. That night, after I tucked her into bed and she asked me one last time if Grandma was mad at her, I sat at the kitchen table and opened a notebook. I wrote down the date, the time, the Instagram story, the unanswered texts. I did not scream. I did not beg. I wrote down every detail and I waited. If you have ever had family use the word family like a pair of handcuffs, stay until the end. After that birthday afternoon, the quiet did not feel temporary. It felt familiar, like a pattern finally revealing its full shape. This was not the first time my mother Diane forgot something important to Emma. She forgot last year too, or at least she said she did, sending a belated card weeks later with the wrong age written inside. She forgot the preschool recital even though I had texted her the date twice, and followed up with a reminder the morning of. She forgot the dentist appointment where Emma cried afterward and asked if Grandma could come next time because she thought it would make it hurt less. Diane always had a reason, always delivered calmly, as if forgetting was a scheduling error instead of a choice. Yet somehow she never forgot anything connected to my sister Lauren. She remembered Lauren's salon opening date down to the hour. She remembered the color scheme, the signage deadline, the name of the contractor who was already 3 weeks late. She remembered Lauren's anniversary with her husband, her dog's vet appointment, even the name of a candle Lauren once mentioned liking at a store in Easton. Watching this contrast over time felt like standing in a room where the temperature changed depending on who walked in. When it came to Emma, the air went cold. When it came to Lauren, everything warmed instantly. I learned early that my role in this family came with tasks disguised as favors. Diane never asked directly. She framed everything as small, reasonable, temporary. Can you put the deposit down just until we move money around? Can you sign this quickly? It is only procedural. Can you call and explain things better? You are so good with people. The requests stacked quietly one on top of the other until they formed something solid and heavy. I booked venues I would never attend. I handled calls that made my stomach tighten because I was speaking on behalf of decisions I did not make. I put my name on documents that were not meant to benefit me, always reassured with the same tone. It is nothing. It is just for now. Family helps family. When I started hesitating even once, Diane's voice sharpened in a way only I seemed to notice. You are good with numbers, she would say, as if that explained why my bank account should absorb everyone else's mistakes. When I tried to explain that I was tired, that I was stretched thin, that Emma needed things too, Diane would sigh and tell me not to be dramatic. She would remind me that stress was part of adulthood and that I should be grateful I was capable. The sentence that stayed with me longest came the afternoon after Emma's birthday. I called Diane not to argue, but to say that Emma had asked for her. Diane paused, then laughed lightly and said it was a kid's party, Noelle. It is not a real event. Something about the way she said it made my chest feel tight, as if my daughter's joy existed in a category that did not require effort. I did not raise my voice. I did not argue. I listened. I always listened. I learned how to hold the phone at just the right angle so my smile stayed in place, even when my jaw clenched. I learned how to nod while standing in my own kitchen, keys pressed hard into my palm, the metal biting into my skin just enough to keep me present. I learned how to glance at Emma sitting on the floor nearby, coloring quietly, and swallow whatever I wanted to say, so she would not hear disappointment in my voice. There were moments when I felt the weight of it physically, at school pickup watching grandparents wait by the fence with balloons while Emma searched the crowd, at Dollar Tree choosing decorations because I knew nobody else would bring them. At home, late at night, folding laundry while Lauren texted about another emergency, and Diane forwarded the message to me with a single word. Help! I smiled through family dinners where Lauren talked about her plans, and my parents listened with shining eyes. I smiled when my role was reduced to logistics, when my contributions were invisible, unless something went wrong. Each time I stayed quiet, I told myself it was easier. Each time I stayed quiet, the expectation grew. Families like mine do not raise daughters. They raise emergency funds. The hardest part is not being used. It is watching your child learn that you will always be used and wondering how much of that lesson she is absorbing without words. I started noticing the pattern more clearly after the birthday, as if the disappointment had sharpened my focus. Diane would still call, still frame requests, as minor inconveniences still speak as if my compliance was inevitable. Lauren would still text late at night assuming I would fix things because I always had. and I would still stand there, phone in hand, heart heavy, wondering how long I could keep pretending this was normal. I did not confront them. I did not announce boundaries. I observed. I took mental notes. I noticed how quickly concern turned into irritation when I asked questions. I noticed how often my hesitation was met with guilt. And for the first time, instead of blaming myself for feeling tired, I recognized what it was doing to me. If you recognize this kind of manipulation, comment, "I see it." The message arrived 2 days later while I was wiping crayon dust from the kitchen table and packing Emma's lunch for school. It was from my mother, Diane, and it did not begin with an apology or even a greeting. It began with a sentence that landed like a weight on my chest. "We need you to cover $150,000 by Friday." There was no explanation attached, no acknowledgement of Emma's birthday, no question mark. Just a demand followed by a praying hands emoji and a short verse about honoring one's parents. I stood there staring at the screen, the peanut butter knife frozen in my hand, feeling that familiar pressure build behind my eyes. It was the way the message was framed that made my stomach twist. The money was not presented as help. It was presented as obedience, as if refusing would not simply be a financial decision, but a moral failure. I set the phone down, finished cutting the sandwich, and slid it into Emma's lunchbox. She was humming again, oblivious, tying her shoes by the door. I waited until she left on the bus before I read the follow-up messages. Diane explained that she and my father Richard had signed into a small commercial deal for Lauren. Not a medical emergency, not a sudden crisis, a business decision. Lauren had found a spot for a coffee kiosk near a busy office park. It sounded reasonable on the surface, the kind of thing people did every day. But they had misjudged the costs. The foot traffic was lower than expected. The build-out went over budget. A clause in the lease triggered a shortfall they could not cover without consequences. The number sat there again in plain text, heavy and exact with a deadline attached. At first, the tone stayed light. Diane wrote that it was just help, that I was good at smoothing things out, that this was temporary. Then the language shifted. "This is a responsibility. Family stands together. After all we have done for you, you owe us this." The final message included a link. "Just sign this," Diane wrote. "It is standard." I opened the link on my laptop while the house was quiet. DocuSign loaded with my name, already filled in my email, pre-entered the pages, arranged neatly as if this had been planned for a while. I scrolled slowly, my eyes moving line by line the way they had learned to do over years of careful reading. It did not take long to see it. Buried in the middle was a clause that named me as guarantor. If the deal collapsed, the liability would land on me. Not Lauren, not my parents, me. I leaned back in my chair and let the room settle around me. The refrigerator hummed. A bird tapped against the window. Everything felt too normal for what I was reading. I closed the document and opened another folder without thinking, one I rarely touched during the day. The label was simple, LLC Quarterly. I did not open anything inside it. I did not need to. Just seeing the folder was enough to remind me of choices I had made quietly years earlier, decisions that had required patience and restraint. My phone buzzed again. A call from a contact saved as M. Caldwell. I let it ring once, then twice, then silenced it. Another buzz followed, this time J. Rios. I turned the phone face down on the table and walked down the hall to check on Emma, who was napping on the couch with her backpack still on one shoe dangling off her foot. I brushed the hair off her forehead and watched her breathe. I did not tell anyone about the calls. I did not mention the folder. I went back to the kitchen, reopened the DocuSign, and read it one more time. Diane sent another message while I was looking at it. "Please do not make this difficult." God sees obedience. I felt something inside me steady instead of crack. The deadline glared at me from the screen, bold and urgent, designed to rush me into compliance. I thought about Emma standing on the porch with her paper crown. I thought about the way responsibility had always been handed to me like a bill instead of a choice. I moved my cursor to the bottom of the document and selected the option that had always been available but never used: decline to sign. The confirmation box appeared. I clicked it without hesitation. If you want to know what that document was really designed to trap, do not leave the video. I waited an hour before responding long enough to be sure my hands were steady and my thoughts were clear. Then I typed a single sentence and sent it. I can't do that. There was no explanation attached, no softening language, no apology. The reply came almost immediately. "Of course you can," Diane wrote. "You just won't." The words carried the familiar edge of mockery, the assumption that my refusal was temporary emotional, something that would collapse under pressure. That pressure arrived the next morning in the form of an envelope slid halfway under my front door. It was thick cream-colored, stamped with a local firm's logo. Not court papers, not a summons, just a letter on official letterhead written to sound serious enough to intimidate without committing to anything real. The language accused me of interfering with family finances, of withholding support that had been reasonably expected, of creating unnecessary hardship through refusal. It suggested legal options without naming them, consequences without specifying what they were. I sat at the kitchen counter reading it while Emma colored beside me her crayons, clicking softly against the paper. The contrast made my chest tighten. I folded the letter once and placed it in a drawer without comment. That was when the calls started. Diane reached out to Pastor Whitaker, the man who had baptized me and shaken my hand every Sunday for years. He called to say he was concerned that my mother was worried about my heart, that family unity mattered more than contracts or numbers. He spoke gently, as if he were guiding me back from something dangerous. Diane called my aunt, my cousin, people I had not spoken to in months, framing the story carefully. "Noelle has been unstable since she became a single mom," she said. "She is overwhelmed. She is confused. She does not know what she is doing." By the end of the week, a post appeared on her Facebook page, wrapped in scripture and vague language about forgiveness and pride, and daughters who forget where they come from. Friends commented with praying hands and concerned messages. No one tagged me directly. No one asked my side. I did not respond. I did not correct the record. I did not defend myself online. I did the only thing that felt solid. I opened a document on my laptop and began to write. Dates, times, screenshots, the birthday, the Instagram story, the demand, the DocuSign, the letter. Each entry was factual, unemotional, precise. I saved everything in a folder and backed it up. They wanted me emotional. Paperwork doesn't cry. When the noise outside grew loud enough to make my chest ache, I stepped away from the screen and went for a walk with Emma, holding her hand as we circled the block. Neighbors waved. Life continued. 2 days later, I met Ms. Patel at a small coffee shop near the library, the kind of place with chipped mugs and a bell on the door. She lived 2 houses down and had watched more than she ever said. We talked about weather and school first, the way people do when they are easing toward something. Then she mentioned Lauren's kiosk, without prompting, how she had heard the landlord was nervous, how vendors were already pulling back. She said it casually, stirring her coffee, then added that the whole setup depended on a service connection that could disappear if one phone call went unanswered. She glanced at me just briefly and then looked away. I did not ask questions. I did not smile. I simply nodded, understanding, settling into place without drama. I walked home with Emma, her fingers sticky from a cookie, the weight of everything pressing and clarifying at the same time. They had escalated. I had not. And somewhere between the smear and the silence, leverage had quietly revealed itself. They thought a lawyer would scare me. They forgot what I do for a living. If you have ever been smeared just for setting a boundary, you will understand what comes next. The meeting was held on a Thursday evening at the community center 3 blocks from my house, the kind of place with folding chairs, a humming fluorescent light, and a sign-in sheet by the door. It was a combined HOA and neighborhood business committee gathering, the sort of event people attended out of obligation rather than interest. Diane insisted I come. She said it would look bad if I did not show that people would talk, that this was my chance to do the right thing in front of others. She picked me up herself, sitting stiffly in the driver's seat, rehearsing phrases under her breath. I understood then that she believed public pressure would succeed where private guilt had failed. Lauren was already there when we arrived, her eyes red, her posture carefully fragile. The room filled quickly. Familiar faces nodded politely. I took a seat near the back, Emma, with a neighbor for the evening, my folder tucked under my arm. When the agenda reached open comments, Diane stood before anyone else could speak. Her voice carried easily. She said she was disappointed. She said she never thought she would see the day when her own daughter would refuse to help family. She gestured toward me, making sure everyone knew exactly who she meant. She won't help family, Diane said, her tone wounded and firm at the same time. After all we sacrificed. Heads turned. A few murmurs rippled through the room. Lauren rose next, clutching a tissue, her voice shaking just enough to sound convincing. I am going to lose everything, she said, everything we worked for, all because she said no. The room went quiet in that way that feels heavier than noise. All eyes found me. This was the moment Diane had counted on, the shame she believed would force my hand. I stood, slowly walked to the front, and placed the folder on the table. It was thin, unimpressive. I did not look at Diane or Lauren. I looked at the committee chair, Mr. Haynes, who nodded for me to speak. I did not raise my voice. I did not argue. I opened the folder and laid out the papers in a neat line. They missed Emma's birthday, I said. 2 days later they demanded $150,000. I held up the DocuSign printout. This document makes me liable. There was a pause. Someone shifted in their chair. I continued my words, measured, factual. My name was used without consent. I was asked to guarantee a deal I did not approve. I turned slightly, just enough to address the room without performing. I am a silent partner in a local service business. I am not wealthy. I do not fund projects. But I control whether certain contracts stay in place. Lauren's arrangement depends on one of those contracts. The silence deepened. Mr. Haynes cleared his throat and leaned forward, reviewing the papers. He looked up and spoke clearly. She is not obligated. This is not how sponsorship works. Her name was used without consent. A murmur moved through the room, different now. Not sympathetic, curious. Diane's face tightened, the practiced indignation slipping. Lauren stared at the table, frozen. For the first time, the narrative had shifted out of their control. I gathered my papers, thanked Mr. Haynes, and returned to my seat. Diane did not speak again. Lauren did not cry again. The meeting moved on, but nothing felt the same. When we walked out, Diane's hand trembled on her purse strap. The moral argument had collapsed. The pressure had failed. They were standing at the edge of something they could not push through. This was the moment they understood what no meant. The calls came a week after the meeting, not loud this time, not demanding, but careful and measured, as if volume alone could change meaning. Richard called first, his voice thinner than I remembered, older somehow, as if the words weighed on him before he spoke them. "We did not mean it," he said. "Your mother was stressed. Things got out of hand." He spoke slowly, choosing phrases that placed blame on circumstance instead of choice. He asked how Emma was doing, paused too long after her name, then said family should not fall apart over money. I listened without interrupting, my hand resting on the counter, my eyes on the quiet street outside. When the call ended, Diane followed with a package left on my porch. Inside was a dress for Emma too small, and clearly clearance rack cheap, with a card tucked inside that read, "Family First," in looping handwriting. No apology, no acknowledgement, just an attempt to reset the board without admitting the move had been wrong. I waited until Emma was asleep before responding. I did not call. I sent a text. "You did not forget. You chose." A moment later, I added the only other sentence I needed. "I am not available for this role anymore." There was no argument after that, just silence broken by consequences that unfolded quietly. Lauren listed her car for sale, the shiny one she had driven to the meeting, and delayed the opening of the kiosk she had promised everyone would launch by summer. I heard through Ms. Patel that the lease was being renegotiated, that the terms were no longer generous, that optimism had been replaced by caution. Diane stopped attending certain gatherings at the community center, her absence noted more than her presence ever had been. People remembered the night she had brought private conflict into a public room and watched it fail. The final message came late one evening, Diane again, her tone sharp beneath the softness. "You will regret this when we are gone," she wrote. I read it once, felt nothing rise to meet it, and set the phone down without replying. If you want to see how Noelle responds when they come back asking, do not skip what comes next. The weeks that followed were quieter in ways I had not expected, the noise gone, but replaced with something steadier. I started taking Emma to the library after school, letting her wander the aisles while I sat near the window with a book I never quite finished. We went to the thrift store on Saturdays not because we needed anything, but because she liked digging through bins and declaring small treasures. On warm afternoons, we packed simple picnics and sat in the park watching dogs run, and neighbors pass by, the kind of ordinary moments that used to feel rushed when my phone was always buzzing. Ms. Patel joined us sometimes, bringing cut fruit and stories about her childhood that made Emma laugh. Gus fixed a loose step on my porch without being asked, and refused payment, saying it was good to be useful to people who appreciated it. A few other neighbors stopped by more often, not to ask questions but to share coffee or watch Emma ride her bike. It was not a replacement for family, it was something quieter and more reliable. As the months passed, the ache softened into understanding. Sometimes the hardest boundary is accepting your parents will not become who you needed. You can love people and still refuse to be their solution. Peace is not loud. It is what happens when you stop negotiating your dignity. Those thoughts settled in slowly, not as slogans, but as truths earned through repetition. A year later, in May of the following spring, my phone buzzed while I was lighting candles on a small cake. A message from Diane appeared with no demand attached. "Happy birthday, Emma." I read it once, set the phone face down on the counter, and turned back to my daughter. She leaned forward, cheeks full, eyes bright, and blew out the candles in one breath. The room filled with clapping and laughter from the people who had chosen to be there. They wanted my silence. I chose my life.